Lena always felt uneasy around mirrors. It wasn't a fear, not exactly, more like a deep, unsettling awareness. A feeling that her reflection wasn't just an image, but something else. Something that watched her. As a child, she avoided looking in mirrors. She hated the way her reflection seemed to stare back, holding her gaze with an unnerving intensity. Her parents dismissed it as childish imagination, but the feeling persisted. Years passed, but the unease remained. Lena learned to live with it, to ignore the prickle on the back of her neck whenever she caught her own eye in the mirror. But deep down, the feeling never went away. The feeling that something was watching, waiting. One night, everything changed. Lena was getting ready for bed. It had been a long day, filled with the usual hustle and bustle of work and errands. She was looking forward to the comfort of her bed, the soft embrace of her pillows, and the promise of a good night's sleep. She stood in her bathroom, brushing her hair, lost in thought. The rhythmic strokes of the brush through her long dark hair were almost hypnotic, a nightly ritual that helped her unwind. The bathroom was dimly lit, casting soft shadows on the walls. As she caught her reflection in the mirror, she felt that familiar shiver of unease. It was a feeling she couldn't quite shake, a sense that something was off, though she couldn't put her finger on it. Her eyes scanned her own face, searching for the source of her discomfort, but this time something was different. There was a subtle shift in the air, a tension that hadn't been there before. Lena leaned in closer, her brow furrowing in confusion. Her reflection wasn't mimicking her movements. She raised her hand to touch her face, but the image in the mirror remained still. Its eyes locked onto hers with an intensity that sent chills down her spine. It stood still, a strange, almost predatory smile playing on its lips. The smile was unlike anything Lena had ever seen on her own face, twisted and sinister, as if it belonged to someone else entirely. Lena froze, her heart pounding in her chest. She couldn't tear her eyes away from the reflection, her mind racing with questions and fear. What was happening? Was she dreaming? The room seemed to close in around her, the walls pressing in as her panic grew. The smile in the mirror widened, becoming almost grotesque. It stretched unnaturally, the corners of the mouth pulling back in a way that defied human anatomy. Lena's breath caught in her throat, her pulse quickening. She blinked, expecting her reflection to snap back to normal, but it didn't. The eerie image remained, staring back at her with an unnerving intensity that made her skin crawl. She blinked again, harder this time, willing the nightmare to end. The smiling reflection remained, staring back at her with an unnerving intensity. It felt as though it was peering into her very soul, uncovering her deepest fears and insecurities. Lena's hands trembled, the brush slipping from her grasp. Lena stumbled back, dropping her hairbrush on the floor with a loud clatter. The sound echoed in the small bathroom, jolting her out of her paralysis. She took a shaky step back, her eyes never leaving the mirror. The sound seemed to break the spell. The oppressive atmosphere lifted slightly, and Lena felt a small measure of control return to her. She took a deep breath, trying to steady her racing heart. Her reflection blinked, its smile vanishing, and it resumed mimicking her movements as if nothing had happened. The sinister presence was gone, replaced by her own familiar face, looking just as confused and frightened as she felt. Lena stood there for a moment, shaken to her core, before finally turning away from the mirror, her heart still racing. She knew she would never forget the smile in the reflection, a haunting reminder of the unknown lurking just beneath the surface of the everyday. That night, Lena lay awake in bed, unable to shake off the image of the smiling reflection. The memories sent chills down her spine, and she couldn't shake off the feeling that something was terribly wrong. As she lay there, she thought she heard a faint whispering coming from the direction of her bathroom. It was a low, sibilant sound, barely audible above the silence of the night. At first, she dismissed it as her imagination, but the whispering continued, growing slightly louder. Fear gnawed at the edges of her mind. She told herself it was just the wind or the pipes, but deep down a primal instinct screamed at her that something was wrong, very wrong. The next night, the whispering returned. This time, it was accompanied by a soft, rhythmic tapping sound, like someone gently rapping their knuckles against glass. Lena lay frozen in her bed, her heart pounding against her ribs. She knew the sound was coming from the bathroom, specifically from the mirror. She could feel its presence, cold and menacing, just beyond the thin veil of darkness. Terror threatened to consume her, but she couldn't bring herself to move. Couldn't tear her gaze from the dark doorway. The tapping grew more insistent, more demanding. It was as if something on the other side of the mirror was trying to get her attention, trying to break through. Days turned into nights, and each night brought with it new horrors. Lena could feel the weight of the darkness pressing in on her, a suffocating presence that seemed to grow stronger with each passing hour. The once comforting silence of her home had turned into a sinister void, filled with the echoes of her own fears. The tapping on the mirror became a constant torment, a relentless reminder of the entity trapped on the other side. It was as if the mirror had become a portal to another world, one where nightmares were born and thrived. Each tap sent shivers down her spine, a cruel reminder that she was never truly alone. The whispers grew louder, more distinct, though Lena still couldn't make out any words. They seemed to come from all directions, surrounding her, enveloping her in a cocoon of dread. Then came the shadows, creeping into her peripheral vision, dancing just out of reach, taunting her with their elusive presence. At first they were fleeting glimpses, dark shapes flitting at the edge of her vision whenever she looked in the mirror. They moved with an unnatural grace, slipping in and out of the darkness like phantoms. Lena tried to convince herself that it was just her imagination, but deep down she knew better. But as the nights went on, the shadows grew bolder, lingering longer, taking on vaguely humanoid forms. They seemed to be watching her, studying her, as if waiting for the perfect moment to strike. The air grew colder, and the sense of impending doom became almost unbearable. One night, as Lena lay in bed, paralyzed by fear, she saw it. Her heart pounded in her chest, each beat echoing like a drum in the silence. She wanted to scream, to run, but her body refused to obey. She was trapped, a prisoner of her own terror. A tall, shadowy figure standing in the doorway of her bathroom, its form obscured by the darkness. It was taller than any human, its limbs unnaturally long and thin. The darkness seemed to cling to it, as if it were a part of the shadows themselves. Its eyes, 2 points of malevolent red light, bored into her, filled with an ancient hunger. They glowed with a sinister intensity, piercing through the darkness and into her very soul. Lena could feel the malevolence radiating from those eyes, a palpable force that threatened to consume her. Lena screamed, burying her face in her pillow, but the figure didn't move. Her scream was muffled, swallowed by the oppressive darkness that filled the room. She prayed for it to be a nightmare, for the figure to disappear, but it remained, a silent sentinel of her deepest fears. It simply stood there, watching her, waiting. The air was thick with tension, every second stretching into an eternity. Lena knew that this was only the beginning, that the true horror was yet to come, and as the figure continued to watch, she realized that there was no escape from the shadows that had claimed her. The figure in the shadows became a constant presence in Lena's life. It was always there, lurking at the edge of her vision, watching her every move from the depths of the mirror. She tried covering the mirror, but it didn't help. The figure was always there, its red eyes burning through the fabric, watching, always watching. Lena's life became a waking nightmare. She couldn't sleep, couldn't eat, couldn't escape the feeling of being constantly watched, hunted by something she didn't understand. The mirror had become her tormentor, its cold, unblinking gaze a constant reminder of the darkness that lay just beyond the surface. One night, Lena woke up from a nightmare to find herself staring into the mirror across the room. She tried to look away, but it was like her gaze was locked, held captive by some unseen force. As she stared into the depths of the mirror, she noticed something strange. Her reflection was gone. In its place was a swirling vortex of darkness, the red eyes of the shadowy figure staring out at her from its depths. The vortex seemed to beckon her, drawing her in, promising something sinister and unknown. Lena felt herself being pulled toward the mirror, her body moving without her consent. She tried to scream, but no sound escaped her lips. She was powerless to resist, helpless against the pull of the darkness that emanated from the mirror's depths. Just as Lena felt herself being sucked into the mirror, her phone buzzed on the nightstand, breaking the spell. She collapsed back onto her bed, gasping for breath, her body trembling uncontrollably. The mirror was once again just a mirror, her reflection staring back at her with wide, terrified eyes. Shaking, Lena reached for her phone. It was a message from an unknown number. Heart pounding, she clicked it open. The message contained a single photo. It was a selfie of Lena, her face pale and streaked with tears, her eyes wide with terror. But the photo wasn't taken from outside the mirror. It was taken from inside. A wave of nausea washed over Lena as she stared at the photo. It was as if the very essence of the image was seeping into her soul, making her feel weak and vulnerable. She couldn't tear her eyes away, even though every fiber of her being screamed at her to look away. The room seemed to close in around her, the walls pressing in, suffocating her with the weight of the unknown. It was impossible, yet there it was. The photo depicted a scene she had never witnessed, yet it felt eerily familiar. The shadows in the image seemed to move, to breathe, as if they were alive. She could almost hear the whispers of the past, the echoes of forgotten memories that were not her own. The air around her grew colder, and she shivered involuntarily. Proof that the entity in the mirror was real, that it had somehow managed to reach out from its prison and capture her image. The mirror had always been a source of unease for Lena, but now it was a portal to her worst nightmares. She could see the faint outline of a figure, its eyes gleaming with malevolent intent. The hand reaching out from the mirror seemed to beckon her, to draw her closer to the abyss. As Lena stared at the photo, another message from the unknown number appeared on the screen below the photo. Her heart raced as she read the words, her mind struggling to comprehend the reality of the situation. The messages had started innocuously enough, but they'd grown more sinister with each passing day. Now they were a constant reminder of the entity's presence, a harbinger of the doom that awaited her. 2 words, cold and menacing. "You're mine." The message was a declaration, a claim on her very existence. It was as if the entity was marking her, branding her as its own. The words echoed in her mind, a relentless mantra that she couldn't escape. She felt a chill run down her spine, the hairs on the back of her neck standing on end. Lena screamed, flinging the phone across the room, the sound echoing into the silence of the night. The phone clattered to the floor, the screen shattering upon impact. But the message remained, burned into her memory. She could still see the words, glowing ominously in the darkness. Her scream was a release, a desperate attempt to break free from the entity's grasp, but it was futile. She scrambled back on the bed, her eyes fixed on the mirror, fear clawing at her throat. The room seemed to grow darker, the shadows lengthening and twisting into grotesque shapes. She could feel the entity's presence, its gaze boring into her soul. Her breath came in short, ragged gasps as she tried to make sense of the nightmare unfolding before her. The reflection in the mirror smiled, a slow, predatory smile that sent chills down Lena's spine. She was trapped. The smile was a promise, a vow that the entity would never let her go. It was a reminder of the power it held over her, the control it exerted over her life. She could feel its malevolence, its hunger for her fear. And she knew that there was no escape, trapped with the sinister secret of the mirror, forever bound to the entity that resided within its depths. The mirror was a gateway, a conduit for the entity's dark influence. It had chosen her, singled her out as its victim, and there was no way to break free from its grasp. The weight of this realization pressed down on her, suffocating her with its inevitability, and there was nothing she could do to escape. The entity's hold on her was absolute, its power unyielding. She was a prisoner in her own home, a captive to the darkness that lurked within the mirror. The despair was overwhelming, a crushing force that left her feeling helpless and alone. She could only wait for the entity to make its next move, knowing that her fate was sealed.